Welcome to the Buying a Home in the Netherlands webinar. It's officially 7:05. We always want to give people the time to join. My name is Kimo Paula, and I will be giving this webinar together with two lovely colleagues slash partners. Below me, you'll see Ludo, my direct colleague, and from Mr. Mortgage, Robin joins us. Can everybody hear me? I think maybe if you guys, you can raise your thumb, then that's fine. Perfect. Awesome. Let's give it a go. Some general mentions. Today's session will be recorded and shared, so no need to take any notes. We'll share this via email afterwards. We're going to talk a little bit about us, of course, to introduce ourselves, and talk a little bit more about renting versus buying and the buying process itself. And then there's plenty of time for Q&As. My colleague Ludo will be answering questions in the background. So if you have any questions, ask them in the Q&A. You'll find the Q&A section on the bottom in your kind of like navigation screen, or if you have it on the top, you'll see it there. So pop them in the Q&A. Don't pop them in the chat. If you have like regular things to mention, pop them in the chat. But the Q&A is for the questions. We're not going to answer all the questions during the webinar. At the end of the webinar, at the end of the presentation, we'll try and answer the rest of the questions that Ludo didn't get to answer. He's a great question answerer, so I think he'll manage a lot, but there might be a few left at the end. Perfect. So before we start, we'd love to get to know you a little bit better. So what we've done is we have a quick poll of 3 questions. I'm going to launch it right now. Let's see if everyone can see it. I'm going to give it like 30 seconds for you to answer. It's not mandatory, but we'd love to get to know you a little bit better. Find out where you found out about us, how old you are, and what your household looks like, and also what made you decide to buy. And the last but not least question, where would you like to buy? And maybe we can like tailor make this webinar a little bit to your profile. So I'm seeing the first answers come in. Thanks a lot for that. Great. Perfect. So a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1, and I'll share the poll. So what we're looking at are the following results. The majority of you found us through Facebook or some other platform. If you found us through another platform, maybe pop that in the chat. We'd love to find out how you found out about us. How old are you guys? Like the majority of you are between 25 and 45. We got a few youngsters and a few experienced livers amongst us. And what does your household look like? The majority is single, a few couples and a few families. What made you decide to buy? The rents are too high. That is obvious. I would like to settle. That is a really good sign. A compliment to the Netherlands, so welcome. And you would like to build up equity, which is, of course, a bonus to buying a home. Where would you like to buy? The majority of you want to buy in Amsterdam. Then second in line, we have The Hague and Almere, and there's other as well. Rotterdam is fourth in place. Other, if you have another place you'd love to buy in, again, pop it in the chat, because that gives us some intel and we can maybe answer some of the questions specifically for those. Awesome. So that is that. Thank you for answering. I'll share a little bit more about Expat Housing Network. I always believe greatness is achieved in the agency of others. So this is the team. They'll be supporting you if you decide to move forward with us and get our service. What you can see is that the majority of them are actually from abroad. So we know what it's like to move to the Netherlands. They've all bought a home, so also know what it's like to actually go through that process. From Cyprus to Brazil to Belgium, all over the place. Some more information about us. We're not real estate agents, so that's maybe good to know. Why is that important? Because we don't necessarily have a real estate background. The majority of us have backgrounds in liberal arts or psychology or name it. Our focus is to make sure that the process is super pleasant for you. We don't move bricks. We don't move properties. We're not in for the deal. We're in to make sure that you feel at home and find a home. One other thing is that we only support with buying a home or finding a home to rent. Well, in this case, you'll be here for buying a home. Why is this important? Because let's say you're dealing with another real estate agent and they're they have to choose, or they have two clients at the moment, right? One is a client that wants to sell, the other one is a client that wants to buy. Selling is relatively simple in this market. It's a seller's market. So the priority most likely go to the client that wants to sell the property. We do not do that. We only help you with buying a home. That's our focus. That's where our experience is. That's how we build the processes, build a network. So we're pretty good at that, in my humble opinion, of course. We charge a fixed fee. No commissions. We don't believe in percentages. Why should you pay us more if you're already paying more? We'll talk about the fees in a few as well. And we know it's like to sell in a new country, like you saw on the previous slide. The majority of us have actually lived abroad or are from abroad. So we know what it's like to move to a new country and actually settle there. Robin, maybe you'd like to share a little bit more about the team and yourself.
Sure thing. Thank you. So I'm Robin Uithagen, the second from the left, and my team are joined by Cesar Yilmaz, the founder of Mr. Mortgage to start with, and also joined by Özkan Karakol, the other financial specialist. We call him the Wizard of Oz, obviously. So he's our kind of knowledge center, so he knows everything you need to know about all the specifications, and that's what we like to do as well always. Our primary focus is on the international clients because no story is the same, and it's always nice to have these different backgrounds. We all have experience in multicultural situations where we really thrive and like the different stories. And there is Egle as well, our growth marketeer. She's from Lithuania and came here to find an adventure, and she did, and she's complementing our team marvelously. And very much look forward to helping anybody that wants to settle here in the Netherlands. And as Kim already so eloquently put, it's a compliment for anybody that wants to settle here. I was born and raised here. I really like it, and I'd like to help you to find your way around as well. So that's what we're here to do.
Perfect. Thanks, Robin. By the way, we work a lot with Mr. Mortgage. These guys are awesome when it comes to anything mortgage related. And also they have some financial backgrounds as well. So it's not just the mortgage itself, it's kind of like financial planning too. So don't hesitate to reach out in case you have any questions. Today's goal is to add value to you. We believe in sharing information freely. So we're going to try and make this as informative as possible. Of course, people are in different stages of the process. So what we try to do is try to make a presentation that is useful for everyone. We might not be able to answer all of the questions in the presentation, and that's why the Q&A is so important as well. I think the presentation will take about 30 minutes, and then, well, if I speak this fast, it might be 20 minutes. But at the end, we'll try and answer any of the questions that you have. So please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Ludo, put Ludo to work, otherwise he might fall asleep. So put him to work, and we'll try to answer the questions at the end as well. A newsflash, maybe some information to share with you guys. One is the National Mortgage Guarantee. What does that mean? Let me give you an example. You're buying a house now, and you get a mortgage for 300,000 euros. Let's say a year from now, and God forbid you lose your job, and you can't pay your mortgage anymore. You're forced to sell, but unfortunately, the house prices dipped a little bit, and you are left with a debt to the bank because you don't have enough money to pay off the mortgage. Then the National Mortgage Guarantee covers this. Why is this important? Well, after the global financial crisis, we found out that a lot of people were borrowing more than they were actually spending on the house. And at some point, when the prices dipped, the houses were underwater. Very typical for the Netherlands, especially considering that the majority of the Netherlands is below sea level, but that's what we call it. And they were left with a debt with the bank. We didn't want it anymore, so the National Mortgage Guarantee is a system put into place to make sure that in case anything happens that you can't foresee, maybe you lose your job, you lose a limb, you lose a partner, God forbid, we hope not. But in that case, if you can't pay your mortgage and you're left with a debt, then they'll cover it for you. What is important? Why are these numbers in here? The numbers reflect the cap. So the cap is related to the purchase price of the property. If you buy a property that's 325,000 euros or less, then you'll be able to apply to the National Mortgage Guarantee. If you buy a property for 325,000 euros and €1, you're not allowed to get the National Mortgage Guarantee. So this is the purchase price. It has nothing to do with the amount that you borrow. It's nothing to do with the amount of cash that you put up. It has to do with the actual purchase price agreed between you and the seller. It increases, well, not necessarily increases, but it's linked to the actual prices of the properties on a yearly basis. So therefore, it increased a little bit from last year to this year. Most likely, we'll see an increase next year as well because prices are still going up. Then some more information, transfer tax. Maybe Robin, you would like to share a little bit more about this part?
Sure. Yeah, as of the 1st of this year, the 1st of January this year, there was a slight tax reform regarding your transfer tax. So what was the case always is that when you buy a home, you pay 2% transfer tax. That's non-negotiable, of course. It's with the tax authorities, so good luck there, but it's a fixed 2%. It was. But what turned out to be is that first-time home buyers or home buyers basically to the age of 35 kind of had a very hard time to find their property and to actually buy this property. The reason why is because a lot of investors were taking the property before them. So they outsmarted the first-time home buyers or the younger home buyers, essentially. So to turn that around, there was some tax reform there. So you can see on the left here, Kate, an example. Kate is single, under 35, so there you go. And the purchase price is 400,000 euros. So then the transfer tax is 0%. So essentially, if you buy a house and you're not 35 yet, and it's under 400,000 euros, you don't have to pay transfer tax. Now, that also works with couples. And of course, then there can be the situation that the one is over 35 and the other one is under. And then essentially, what it all boils down that you pay 1% because one has to pay 2% over 50% of the property value or the purchase price, and the other one doesn't have to pay transfer tax. So it's stated here. Kate is 37, John is 33, purchase price is 400,000 euros. So therefore, Kate, being over 35, does have to pay 2%, and John pays 0% transfer tax. Now, there are also is the possibility here on the final option on the right. Kate and John are both 33 years old. Kate already has an apartment. John is a first-time home buyer. And Kate pays 2% property tax, and John pays 0% property tax. This is, by the way, only the situation when Kate already bought after the 1st of this year. So between the 1st of January 2021 and the 31st of December 2024, if you buy a house, if it's your second home, it doesn't matter, you can one time you can have dispensation of that 2%. Now, this is a lot of information, and of course, we can look at your specific situation to see what your specific option would be if you do or do not have to pay transfer tax. Essentially, under 35, under 400,000 euros, then you don't have to pay transfer tax.
Perfect. Thank you very much. By the way, we'll share this presentation, and if you click on the blue button on the bottom here, once you've received the presentation, then you'll be linked to the, I think, the website of Mr. Mortgage, and you'll be able to actually calculate the transfer tax. Okay, sorry. Where in the process are you guys? Okay, we'll ask you a few questions. This is yet another poll, because what I just mentioned was that people are in different buying stages of the process, or the stages of the process, and what we'd love to know is where you guys are. So again, another 30 seconds for you guys to answer some of the questions. We'll try to keep you guys awake as well. So let's see if the answers come in. I'm seeing a lot of answers come in already. Perfect. You guys are bright and steady. Cool. Okay. Nice. Oh, this is a new record. Perfect. Awesome. 4, 3, 2, 1. That's within 30 seconds. I'll share the results. The majority of you are still in the orientation phase. You're researching whether you actually want to buy a home. Great, because that's what you're here for. A few of you have actually started viewing properties, and one person has made an offer. I hope it was successful, and you're here to find out what the next steps are. If not, then chin up. There's most likely going to be a property that you will get an offer accepted on. So keep your hopes up. Did you chat with an agent yet? Some of you have, the majority of you haven't. I'm super curious to find out, for those of you that have chatted with an agent, what you've learned and what the difference is between what you'll hear today versus what you have already learned from the agent. And did you have a chat with a mortgage broker? 12 people said yes, and the other people said no. Again, same question. If you learn anything new, we'd love to hear it. If you've missed anything, or please do share it in the chats. Okay, let's continue. Robin, maybe you'd like to share a little bit more about renting versus buying.
Sure. So why should you rent? In the end, we're called Mr. Mortgage, but we're not in, like Kim already mentioned, we're not in there to just push you to get a mortgage. We'll first get an idea of your finances and then see what makes the most sense to you. So why should you rent? Well, there are a couple of pros and cons, of course. So when you rent your house, your home, you have flexibility. You can give notice and then go. You don't have to sell your house and go through all that process. You have that flexibility. There's no taxes you have to pay. That will all be taken care of your landlord, and the maintenance will also of the property itself. So will also be taken care of by your landlord. Now, no down payment are required. Maybe a security deposit, but that's not in the same realm as a down payment for to buy a home. When you do own your own home, you do have to pay taxes, you do have to take care of the maintenance, and it's a bit harder to move given selling your house and everything. So of course it is a seller's market right now, but that's at this time. We don't know what's going to happen in the foreseeable future, of course, or after 30 years. But generally, it's a bit harder to move. So if you're still interested in getting a mortgage, then why should you buy? Now, when you own your own home, you do have some stability there. So the monthly payments that you pay, you repay in your mortgage. So you build up equity. It gets value in the property. So when you sell it, there will be usually and hopefully a surplus that you have then. So it's kind of saving there. Also, the interest that you pay, you have a tax deduction, so a tax benefit over the interest that you pay. There are some conditions there. We can get to that later, but that's definitely a pro to owning your own home. And then renting your home, the rents will keep rising expectedly, because right now, and they can also increase your rent as time goes by. So therefore, that's also the stability when you own your own home. There's no tax benefit, as mentioned, on the mortgage interest. And there's no creation of wealth through owning your own home, because essentially the rent that you pay is money down a very deep well, and you won't get it back in the end, because it's just throwing money away. But and with owning your own home, you build up equity. So that's those are the main differences and options and reasons why you should potentially own your own home and buy a property.
Perfect.
Now we also made a comparison of two similar properties. One on the left being rented out. You can rent, and on the right you can buy. Similar properties, same square meters, same area. And then we made a comparison. So with 2,250 euros per month on rent, your rent is 27,000 euros per year. So that's something that's money down the drain again. When you look on the right side, and it's something that you can see quite frequently, is that the mortgage that you would take out for a similar property, the monthly payments you can see at the bottom at 1,832 is significantly less than with the rental payment that you would pay. And actually, from this monthly payment we already mentioned, part of that is repayment on the mortgage. So that's building up equity. It's kind of saving in your house. The actual money down the drain is the interest that you have to pay, because that's essentially you paying the bank for borrowing that money. So you can compare that really, so the 691 euros to the 2,250. So in that sense, the ball will more likely go to buying your property. Now, what is good to keep in mind is there are closing fees. We'll get into that later on, what they're specifically made out of, but the closing fees for this kind of property are approximately 23,000 euros. So then it's important, you don't have a down payment with renting a property. So what is your break-even point? When have you earned back that and those closing fees? And that's after approximately 15 months. So very cleanly financially looking at it, it makes sense to buy a property when you stay there for more than 15 months. Really, it's a bit longer. It makes more sense to stay longer in a property to really get the best out of your investment. And that's up to usually about 3 to 5 years, then it really makes sense. And one other thing, you can see an interest rate here, as stated at 1.58. The actual interest rates are significantly lower now. They dropped over the last couple of months, and now they're approximately 1.45, 1.43 even. So that's decreasing somewhat. So yeah, that's renting versus buying. Now, when it comes to this equity I mentioned, how quick that goes is when you look at 5 years, for instance, with a mortgage of 525,000 euros and an interest rate of 1.58. Then after 5 years, you have made 71,179 euros. So that's that buildup of equity and creation of wealth.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Robin just talked a little bit about closing fees. We'll share a little bit more information about that. You see three columns. One, the type of fee. The second column is the amount. And then the third fee or the third column is whether it's tax deductible. Maybe some context. The government wants you to technically get advice, especially when it comes to the more complex products, which in this case is a mortgage. So what they've done is they've said, okay, hey, we want to make it attractive for people to actually get support. So what we're going to do is we're going to do everything that is actually mortgage related. We're going to make that tax deductible. What does that mean? Those amounts that say yes in the third column, you can actually deduct those amounts from your taxable income at the end of the year. So you'll get about, what is it, 40% back, depending a little bit on what your tax bracket will be. We're starting with the top, the transfer tax. If you're eligible to pay it, then the amount is 2%, which is directly the highest cost that you'll pay in the closing fees. If you're not eligible, if you don't have to pay, then you're very lucky, which is great. Then you have the notary fees. They are split up between the mortgage deed and the transfer deed. It depends a little bit on where you request a mortgage or request a notary, because in the more bigger cities, especially the capital, it's a little bit more expensive versus some of the other areas. The bank or the mortgage broker charges as well. Please note it's not free to get a mortgage from a bank. They'll charge you even though they'll make a shitload of money from you. But please note that these amounts are tax deductible, so that's great. The typical real estate agent, why we say typical is because we don't consider EHN a typical real estate agent. The typical real estate agents charge a percentage of the purchase price. Again, I don't think that makes sense. Dinosaurs. Why? Because why should you pay more when you're already paying more for your property? We charge a fixed fee, and the appraiser, which we'll talk a little bit about as well, charge you 550 to 600, depends a little bit on the size of the property and also where you get an appraiser, but they're tax deductible. The technical inspector, we'll talk about that a little bit as well, charges 425, the interpreter 250, the bank guarantee 250 as well, and then there are some costs involved of actually getting the mortgage guarantee, the national mortgage guarantee. This is 0.7% of the mortgage amount, and that is tax deductible. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the people that you'll actually meet during the process. One is Hans the notary. If you buy a property, then the notary will actually draft the legal agreements between you and the seller and you and the bank. Notary will come into play in different stages depending on where you buy. If you buy a property in Amsterdam, he'll come into play after you've submitted an offer and it got accepted. Why? Because the notary will draft the purchase contract. He'll also draft the mortgage deed and transfer deed. If you buy outside of Amsterdam, then most likely the selling agent will draft the purchase contract. So double, triple, quadruple check that one. I still find it very odd that the selling agent drafts one of the more important documents between you and the seller. But again, double check it, triple check it. But once you've signed that purchase contract, then the notary will come into play afterwards. So please bear in mind that the notary will come into play later when you buy outside of Amsterdam versus when you buy in Amsterdam. Please note that the notary is also sworn in, so he's kind of like an independent lawyer, so he has to advise both sides of the aisle. Then meet Michelle, the appraiser. When does she come in? She comes in once your offer is accepted, not before that. Some of you might think, okay, hey, but why don't I want to know what the value of the property is before I submit an offer? You do want to know that. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but you don't want to pay a lot of money for that, right? You don't want to pay $600 for that and then find out that your offer is not accepted. So get Michelle in after your offer is accepted. Why does she have to come in? Because the bank will only give you 100% mortgage based on the value of the property. So she'll define the value. How will she do that? Looking at reference properties. She'll do the majority of the work behind her computer. She'll go to the property to double check if everything is well. She'll ask a few questions to the selling agent, and then she'll do the research at her desk. And then once the research is done, it's not ready yet because she has to send it to an independent institute. Why? Because before the global financial crisis, we didn't have like that checks and balance in play, and the appraisers were very much known to kind of like lean towards the buyers. Why? Because the buyers were paying them, and why would they give a lower value in if that would mean that they wouldn't get repeat business, right now the independent institute will check if these guys have played by the rule, or in this case if Michelle's played by the rules. If she has, then they'll put a stamp on it, and then the bank will technically accept the appraisal report. It's going to take between 3 to 7 business days for everything to go through, so please take your time. Then you'll have the building inspector, women empowerment. Millie will come to the actual property when the offer is accepted. This is not mandatory, by the way. The bank will not ask you to do this. The seller will not ask you to do this. I would advise you to do this. Why? Because especially if you buy a property that's not a new build, you'll want to know what is wrong with the property. Like if we join you on a viewing, we'll be able to tell you some of it. If you see it by yourself, you'll be able to tell some of it. But a technical inspector or surveyor will actually be able to look at the property through contractor's eyes, through construction eyes, and she'll be able to tell you, okay, hey, this is wrong. Spend more time on this. Have a look at this. This is something that needs to be replaced, renewed, or renovated in the near future or the long future. And you want to know what you're buying into. This is probably one of the biggest things you'll buy in the foreseeable future. So make sure you do your due diligence. Nobody wants to buy a house and find out they have to replace the boiler the first month that they're in, or have to like redo the walls or something like that, right? It takes about 2 business days to actually set up the report. So it's a little bit faster than when you get an appraiser in. And then that's where we have him. He's got a little bit of a new coupe, huh? Very, very sharp. I think it's summer, so that's good. Better than the sweaty one before. No. Robin will share all things considering mortgage. Why do I think it's important that you talk to a mortgage advisor? I always like to use the following comparison. The bank is kind of like your old-fashioned retail shop. They'll have a few products on offer, and they'll try to sell you those products, but they're very passive in that sense. Plus, they might not give you the best deal, right? Because they only have a few products on offer. They're not going to tell you, oh, go to the other shop because you'll get a better deal there. They'll try to sell you their products. Robin, in this case, is more kind of like your personal shopper slash stylist. He'll actually go and make sure that you get the best product that you deserve, that you're happy with it. He doesn't really care where you get it from, as long as it's a trustworthy company, but he'll make sure that you're happy with the product and that you are actually aware of what you're getting yourself into. They'll look at several different things. They'll look at mortgage interest rates. They'll look at what it costs to pay off the mortgage, if you get different thresholds, stuff like that. But one of the most important things as well is that these guys are relatively confident on whether you'll be able to get a mortgage or not. And especially in the current market, that is important because you'll start bidding against people that don't have any finance clause in. They don't need the mortgage. They do need a mortgage, but they're not telling anyone. And then you want to make sure that you have a good party to back you up. Plus, the story that these guys tell the bank is almost as important as your details, as your files, because in the end, the bank will want to know that you're a trustworthy party to actually give a lot of money to, and that you'll pay that mortgage for the foreseeable future. So have a chat with them, because I think it's very, very important. And honestly, one decimal point of difference can make a difference. And don't forget, the cost that you have is tax deductible. And then meet Alana, the buying consultant. Alana will inform you and assist you during the full process. We'll talk a little bit more about what kind of services we offer. I think there's 3 key components of the added value of getting a buying consultant. And one is that we'll be able to sometimes actually get viewings when you won't, and agents will trust us and will actually trust the offers that we submit a little bit more than offers from individuals. The second thing is that the market value is super, super important. We'll be able to actually do research and figure out what the actual market value is. Why is that important? I'll talk about that in a few. The third thing is we'll be able to review all the legal documents, the documents related to the property, but also the purchase contract, the transfer deed, and so on. And the fourth most important thing is that it's kind of nice to have somebody along in the process, especially if you don't know anything about rules and regulations, about the market, so on. Again, it's not rocket science, but if you feel you want some company, if you feel that we can add value in any of these places, then don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, then there's a timeline. So what does it look like, the process of actually purchasing a home? Well, we'll start with the start. You're actually going to view properties. And then let's say you submit an offer and your first offer gets accepted. Congratulations. We don't have that happen very often nowadays because there's so much competition, but every now and then it's definitely doable. Your offer gets accepted. Then what I talked about just now is that you want to do your due diligence. So get your appraiser and technical inspector in. Do that before you sign the purchase contract, because once you've signed the purchase contract and the cool-off period, which consists of 3 days after you've signed, ends, then you're committed to the deal. So make sure you do your due diligence before that, so you know what the value of the property is, and you know if there's anything that you need to maybe negotiate on or that you're unhappy with or happy with in terms of the condition of the property. Once you sign the purchase contract, that's great. By the way, don't wait for that moment to talk to Mr. Mortgage. because they'll be able to actually support you before that. They'll require all the documents, request all the documents, and make sure that they can actually have the file complete once you've signed that purchase contract. So yeah, they can send it off to the bank as soon as you've signed. The mortgage application starts, the cool-off period ends, which is 3 days after signing the purchase contract, and then it's about an average of 4 weeks. Summer's up, so it might take 4 weeks, sometimes a little bit longer. Most of the times it takes a little bit shorter. Mr. Mortgage is pretty good at that. No pressure, Robin. But take some time to get your mortgage approved. Once your mortgage application is approved, that's great. Then this is kind of like a dead period. Not much happens in between getting the mortgage approved and the transfer. But about 10 days before you get the keys to the property, you get a final invoice from the notary, because they'll list what you have to pay, they'll list what they have received from the bank, and then there's a remaining amount which consists mainly of the purchase costs or the closing fees that you'll have to transfer to them. On the date of transfer, you actually go to the property first, because you want to make sure that it's still in the same condition as you last saw it. And sometimes when people move things, they break things, or when that piano gets removed, suddenly there's a big gaping hole in the wall that nobody knew of. You want to make sure that that doesn't happen, and that in case it does happen, that either you call us because we're able to support with that, or you have a chat with the selling party and say, okay, how are we going to fix this? Once everything is fine, you actually sign at the notary. You sign the transfer deed and the mortgage deed. You'll be the proud owner of a home and the proud owner of a mortgage, and then you'll be able to enjoy your new home. Let's say something happens the day after you've moved in, and it turns out that something was broken that should have been flagged before or on day of transfer, then you can still hold the landlord liable to some extent. You have to prove, though, that is actually the case, that this was already so when you moved in. The longer you wait, so let's say you find something 4 or 5 weeks after you've moved in, the more difficult it becomes to actually prove if that was the case. So don't wait too long. A reasonable term is about a month, 2 months. But again, if it takes too long, or if you can't really prove that it was broken when you've moved in, then it becomes difficult to actually hold the landlord or the seller liable. Whew. Wow, that was a fast one. What we've done, because we get a few questions we get very often, so we try to answer them now, and then please leave your extra questions in the Q&A. Ludo, this is where you shine. So take it away.
Thank you very much. Always my favorite part of the webinar, the questions that finally I can talk for a bit. We have 10 frequently asked questions. I'm going to start with a question for Robin. The question goes as, can I get a mortgage with a temporary contract or as a freelancer?
Yes. Short answer. True, there are some conditions there. Temporary contract does not have to be any issue. True, the bank wants to, or the lender wants to have as much security about your income as possible. When you have a fixed contract, well, then they know, they have a large expectation that your income will last for a long time. When you have a temporary contract, usually your employer can state, well, okay, you have a temporary contract, but we're intending to give you a permanent contract after this term. This intention is not legally binding. That is something that the employer knows, and also something that the bank knows. But just this tick of a box makes all the difference there and just makes it a bit easier. If that's not the case, then even then, there's still possibilities to get a mortgage on a temporary contract. So usually nothing to worry about, and we'll definitely look at the situation when we see that, of course. Now, as a freelancer, on take back, yeah. As a freelancer, there are also possibilities. And then the most important thing is, what you always read somewhere is that you need 3 years history of your company. As a self-employed person or a freelancer, the 3 years is not 100% necessary. Just the 1 year, so 12 months is already sufficient, though the longer your company exists, the more stability there is for a bank, so the better we can translate your situation to a bank. When you're a freelancer or an entrepreneur, then it is something that's a bit different from being an employee, because the employee is very black and white. This is your income, that is your mortgage. When it comes to being an entrepreneur, that is also something that we have to convince the bank or translate your situation to the bank, saying, well, hey, this and that, this is what the history in the company is, and this is what the expected future will be. So there's a bit more of our translation to the bank involved as well. Definitely possibilities as a freelancer, preferably after 12 months, best after 3 years.
Thank you.
Cool. I'm just gonna, if you can hop back one more, Kimo.
Mm.
I have a follow-up question for you, Robin.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I have a temporary contract at the moment, would my mortgage interest be higher then as well?
No, your mortgage interest rate will not be affected by your contract or being a freelancer or not. No.
Okay, perfect, cool. Thank you. All right, then I do go to my next question, Kimo. My next question would be, what happens if you want to leave the country after several years?
Yeah, it's a good question. We get that asked often, of course, understandably, because you guys have moved here from another country. Who knows what will happen? Maybe you'll move back to your home country, or you get relocated because of work, or name it. There's three options. One, you can actually keep your home, but you'll still have mortgage costs. You can live in another country and have your home here, but again, having a empty home but having mortgage costs is not very attractive. The second option is you can rent out your home, but you do need permission from your bank. Robin will share a little bit more about that in a few. And the third option is you can sell your home. And the good thing about the Dutch housing market is there's no penalty for paying off your mortgage if you sell your home, and there's also no capital gains tax. Let's say the market's increased a little bit, which is likely to happen at least the next 12 months, then you'll make a little bit of a profit. Those are the three options. And I think Robin will share a little bit more. Yeah.
Perfect, cool. All right, moving on to you, Robin. Is it actually possible to rent out my house or part of my house, say a room?
Yes, it is. Those are two very different things. Let's start with the room. So when you have a house and you took out a mortgage on the property, then you have the so-called residential mortgage. So mortgage for the purpose of it being your residence. Then you can rent out a room. Sure, no problem. You can have a roommate, and that's perfectly fine. When it comes to renting out your full house, then that's a bit different. When you rent out your house and you have a residential mortgage, that's specifically against the rules and regulations of any bank. So what you would have to do then, if that's your aim to rent out your house, is to refinance your mortgage, meaning you change your residential mortgage into an investment mortgage or a buy-to-let mortgage, it's also known as. And then the restrictions are a bit stricter there, so the conditions are a bit different from an investment mortgage, definitely possibilities. But usually it is the case that you have to put a bit down on the mortgage to have it financed, but there are definitely possibilities there. But it has to be a different mortgage. Also something we can help you with, of course.
Cool. All right, thanks for that. Kimo, what is the typical amount I should actually overbid, if I should overbid at all?
Yeah. Sadly, it does happen a lot, overbidding. But whenever we get this question, I always would have liked to have the next slides available. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just print them out and bring them everywhere I go, because I get this question asked a lot. And let me show you a few things. We'll have two examples. One is of a property with the asking price of 400,000 euros. Please note that the asking price is the price that the selling agent defines. What do? Is they sit down maybe with the seller, or they sit down by themselves and say, okay, hey, you know what? We're going to put this property up for 400,000 euros. But the actual value of the property, the market value, is 430,000 euros. Okay, so he's lowered it by 30K. That's good, because what he does is he's looking at, okay, how many people can I actually attract to come to the viewings? And I know that a lot of people are looking for properties maybe with a cap of 400,000, but they have some extra cash to put up, so maybe I can get more people in. He wants to actually impress the sellers as well. So the asking price 400,000, market value is 430,000, and then somebody buys it for 460,000 euros. Wow, that is a great deal. Why? Because the selling agent can say, hey, look at me, I've actually received 60K over the asking price, which is 15%, but actually he's only received 7.5% over the market value. Okay, this is example number one. Let's say the same house has a different agent, and this agent is a little bit more sleazy because he puts it up for 380,000 euros. He puts it up for 20,000 euros less because the market value is actually the same. And then somebody also offers or buys it for 460,000 euros. Then suddenly the difference between asking price and purchase price is 80,000 euros. Let's say we use this narrative. And by the way, the difference between market value and the purchase price is not that different. The difference between the asking price and the purchase price is. But everybody, and especially the newspapers, and it drives me crazy, are using this narrative. There's no rule or regulation for real estate agents to link the actual asking price to the market value. They can go as low as they want to. It's not as smart, of course, if they have it, but there's definitely room to maneuver for them. And if everybody starts looking at this and says, okay, hey, asking price, and we're hearing that people are offering 15, 20, 25% over, that is nuts. Because if everybody starts doing that, then at some point, let's say somebody puts it up for 420,000 euros, then people are going to offer and offer more and more and more money. So that is crazy. So that's why, if we go back to the question, what's the typical amount I should overbid? We say, don't look at the asking price, right? Look at the market value. And based on that, you can figure out how much you should overbid. Maybe in this case, you only need to overbid by 30K. In other cases, the same thing applies. Don't look at the asking price, right? Look at the market value. If the market value of this property was lower or a little bit higher, that's what you look at. Don't look at the asking price. Don't stare yourself blind on it. Use the asking price to kind of like look for properties, but don't take it into consideration when you submit an offer. Take the market value in consideration. Why? Because first of all, the bank will give you 100% mortgage on the market value, and anything that you spend on top of that will have to come out of pocket. So look at the market value. Don't look at the purchase price. So if everybody asks us what's the typical amount they should overbid, we'll say there is no typical amount you should overbid, because with one property you might have to overbid a little bit less. With other properties you might even have to underbid because it's overpriced, right? So look at the market value. Maybe I should actually add a slide here where an agent puts it up for 450 or 470,000 euros because it's super opportunistic. That happens as well, right? It doesn't happen very often because the agents are smart, but there's definitely room for them to maneuver between market value and asking price. So don't look at that. Look at the market value of a property. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
It definitely does. I am going to ask a follow-up question for that. How do we actually find the market value, Kimo?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's multiple ways. You can go to the cadastre, you can go to Walter Living. There's plenty of places where you can find reference properties, but doing the actual puzzle of finding out what the market value is still a bit tricky. Why? Because there's about 10 or 15 different factors that play into the actual market value. It's not just finding the reference property that looks closest to your property, right? There's so many different value added criteria that make up for what the market value of your property is. But look at Land Registry, for example, they'll have all the information of sold properties that were sold or at least transferred a month and a half ago. It's a bit of a puzzle to find all that information, but you can definitely do that. If you don't have the time, or if you don't have the confidence, or if you think the puzzle is too complex, then we'll definitely be able to help you out with that. This is where Ludo, you excel in it like crazy. You've helped a lot of people out now with buying a home, so I think that you're the go-to person with some other people as well within the company. But I think that this is something that we do on a daily basis. So we know what it's like, we know what to look out for, and we can do it relatively quick as well and accurate too. Why is it important? Again, because once you get your offer accepted, then you want to make sure that you actually get enough money from your bank to purchase the property. If you're off by a lot, then you might end up not getting the property or not getting a mortgage and therefore having to pull out of the property. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
I think so, for sure. All right, moving on to Robin. Robin, what can you tell me about the fact that if I, for example, leave my job after I've secured a mortgage?
Well, the thing is that your mortgage will only be assessed once. So you buy the house, you sign a purchase agreement, and the evaluation report will be set up, and then we start a mortgage application. We'll file it at the bank or any lender, and then that's when your mortgage will be assessed and your financial situation will be assessed, also by us. If you know anything, then if you already expect, well, I'll change my job in the next 6 months, for instance, that's good for us to know, because we're not working for any banks. We're independent from any of the over 30 banks we work with. You are our only focus point. So we look at your financial situation and what makes sense for you. So, but good to understand is that your mortgage and financial situation will be assessed at the start of the mortgage. Then if anything happens later on in a couple of years and you change your job or you lose your job, then God forbid, of course, then your mortgage will not be reassessed. As long as you can keep paying your mortgage and you can afford it, then your mortgage will just keep going as it is. Of course, if anything changes to your situation, let us know and we'll discuss what the options are, but your mortgage will not be reassessed.
Cool. All right, perfect. I think in the beginning of the webinar, we were talking a little bit about any deposits or bank guarantees. What is actually the 10% deposit that I need to complete?
Yeah, that's usually after the mortgage is approved. Usually that's within that timeline, and before you receive the final statement of completion. Right there, exactly. That's when, with your mortgage application, when that's approved, you have all the security you need. You happy-go-lucky because your mortgage got approved. You just have to wait until you have these much valued keys in your hand. But the seller still doesn't really have any security because you can just pack your bags and go, and they don't have anything. So to give them some security, there's always in any purchase agreement will be a part, one article in there will state the 10% security deposit. That means that if you buy a house for, let's say, 400,000 euros, at that point in time, you have to send 40,000 euros to the notary as a security deposit. At the end, when you go to the handover of the keys, then after that, you will get that 10% back, of course. So it's a security deposit to make sure that you move forward with this purchase. Now, if you don't have these funds available, or you don't want to use your own funds to do this transfer, no problem. There's also an option to get a so-called bank guarantee. And that is where a financial institution or the bank itself will secure this 10% security deposit in your name. So they will do that for you. Banks being banks, they won't do that out of the kindness of their hearts. They will charge you a fee for that, usually around 1% of the secured amount. So buying a house for 400,000 euros, security deposit 40,000 euros, and then the payment to get the bank guarantee is around 400 euros. So that's how it works.
Perfect, cool. Thank you very much. Yeah, banks being banks, huh? We get asked a lot, and I think a very reasonable question. What impact does COVID-19 have on the housing market? Shall we start with you, Kimo?
Yes. So what I'll do is I'll share a little bit more about the actual developments within the housing market and prices. Maybe Rob, you can share a little bit more about the actual developments on mortgage level and interest and stuff. Let's go back to March 2020. We were all having a good time, and I think that especially early March, let's maybe go to end of February, and we saw COVID happening, but first in China, and everybody's like, okay, but that's in China, that's not going to come here, and then Italy, and they're like, oh, that's in Italy, it's not going to come here, and then before we know it was on our doorstep, and then lockdown, and then panic, and everything happened, and everything shut down. The initial response was, okay, this is going to be big, right? It's going to have a big impact. We saw, for example, the people that wanted to buy, we saw that drop. We actually purchased the property for somebody, and before we signed, the lockdown was introduced, and he was like, you know what, I don't want to move forward with this because I'm not sure. And that initial kind of like fear went on for a little bit of time. I actually recorded a little video back then. I was like, okay, what is going to happen? There was no government support in place, nothing in place. So my initial response was, okay, we're going to see a dip in prices because this is definitely going to lead to unemployment, to people not wanting to actually make big purchases. But then something else happened. First of all, the governments started like printing money like crazy. They also gave a lot of support, so nobody was really losing their jobs. The second thing, what happened was that everybody was stuck at home. So suddenly they were looking at their home with new eyes, with blue eyes. They were looking at homes like, maybe I need that extra space, maybe I need that extra room. And then we saw kind of like an increase. People wanted to buy homes. They saw that nothing happened on the housing market. The prices weren't really affected. So we saw an increase of people wanting to buy a home. That started midsummer, and that hasn't changed yet. So I still see this trend continuing for the foreseeable future. Who knows? Like currently with the vaccinations, the world feels a little bit like it's normalizing, but I thought the same thing last summer, and then winter kicked in, and then like everything went nuts again. So I don't have 100% confidence that homes will kind of like be normalized as well. I think that maybe in the winter, people will again suddenly realize, okay, hey, maybe we have to like curtain certain things, and then maybe we'll focus a little bit more on homes again. So I think that this trend will continue. Also, what we saw last year is that the majority of people were actually leaving the cities. Why? Because they wanted more space. They wanted to have that garden. They wanted to have green. They were kind of like stuck to their place, or they couldn't really do much. So then suddenly people started spending more times outdoors, right? I'm living in the city, and I actually craved for that back garden or for a park nearby. So I considered the same thing. So we saw kind of like a little bit of an exodus to the suburbs or to more rural areas. Now that things are normalizing again, we're seeing kind of like with the tides, we're seeing people come back to the city, especially younger people, especially internationals like yourself, right? Borders are opening up again. So the cities are becoming more attractive. At some point, people said, okay, hey, but this whole work from anywhere, work from home thing is going to be big. I think that a lot of companies were virtue signaling, saying like, hey, we don't want to have any rules. We want to give people the freedom so they can work from anywhere. I think practically that's very difficult, especially for the bigger companies, right? Tax wise, HR wise, like I have some experience with that, and relatives and people that are close that are actually working in those fields. And it's not as easy as it seems. Plus, I believe that the social element of being near people, having like that coffee chat and having kind of like this serendipity in the office is definitely something, especially younger people will look for. So I think that the work from home thing is maybe something that will happen 1 or 2 days a week, but the majority of the people will actually still want to move or live close to their office, right? So with all of that in mind, I believe that the housing market will not be impacted in the near future. I do feel that the price have increased quite a lot in the last 12 months, so we might see that slow down a little bit. But again, people have saved a lot of money as well. It's still very, very attractive to own a home versus renting a home because of the government benefits, the fiscal benefits, low interest rates. Robin will share a little bit more about that, but also because of the higher rents, right? So all of that combined created kind of like this mix where we've seen the prices go up, and I expect them to go up at least in the next 12 months. Please, I'm not a financial specialist. I'm not a foreseer. I'm not an econometrist. I only have experience in what is happening in the market because I've seen it, because I've experienced it, because I've lived it. So if I had a glass ball, I would definitely share all the information that I would be able to find with you. But this is my expectation. The next 12 months, I don't foresee anything happening. Of course, at some point we'll have to pay the bill for all the money that we've printed. For at some point, the companies that were surviving because of the government support will have to be taking off the was it IV? I think, yeah. So we have to make sure that if that happens, that we don't get hit. But I expect that the governments are so afraid for another recession or depression that they'll find another way to actually support these people. So will it have an impact on the housing market? As long as it's very affordable and very important and very interesting to own a home versus renting a home, I don't foresee that happening. Is that a good thing? Well, for you it is, especially if the price will increase. I also believe in some volatility in the market, right? Because right now people are paying a lot for properties, and if at some point there's a little dip, and maybe it's going to be a little dip, I think it's better because it's going to make it easier for you guys to buy a home as well. So either way, I think there's some benefits to volatility in the market. But will it happen in the near future? I don't think so. So brace yourself for a level of competitiveness that you've not experienced before. Brace yourself for a process that might take a little bit longer than you expected, and make sure you get the right help to support you. I'm not trying to kind of like promote ourselves, but maybe a personal story. I bought my own home about 5 years ago, 6 years ago now almost. And it took me about 7 offers before I got an offer accepted. And that was then, right? Now it's gone even more crazy. And by the way, back then I wasn't in this business, so I knew almost nothing. If I knew then what I know now, oh my God, I got a little bit lucky. Let's put it like that. But we're trying to make sure that you don't make those same mistakes, and you don't end up having to submit 7 or 10 offers before you get your offer accepted. But I think I digressed a little bit there. Robin, your turn. What's up?
Yeah, so indeed, if I knew back then what I know now, then that crystal ball, I would kept it very safely. I lost it a long time ago, unfortunately. I don't know what's going to happen. And not for sure. Do I have some idea based on what happened? Yes, of course. We saw when COVID hit, then sure, we saw a reaction in the market. And like Kim already mentioned, there are some people that thought, well, okay, I bought a property, but then let me back out because it's too, I don't know what's going to happen. And it makes sense. In the week that it happened, then sure, there will be a shock. And that took some time, but then, and also we saw that in the interest rates, because if there's a shock in the society, then that will go through to the financial market, and there will be a shock there as well. So what we saw, there was an increase of the interest rates of 0.2% approximately. Just to give you an indication, the interest rate right now is around 1.5%. So then March last year, then was around 1.7. 2 years before, it was 2.1, 2.2. So that it was a relative increase there. That's already that wave has come and gone again, and we're ridiculously low at the interest rates right now as well. Now, when there's a low interest rate, there is a fair expectation, or it makes sense that you think, well, okay, then it might increase again. That likelihood that it will increase significantly, that would impact the market as well. I don't really expect that, because if the interest rates increase, that's not only for mortgages, then it's also for other loans, more personal loans, but also company loans, so corporate loans. If that happens, so already there is a hit due to COVID to some companies, not all of them, of course. And then also there's a hit on increase of interest rates. So that's very unlikely to happen, because that will collapse not necessarily the mortgage market, but just the financial situation in the Netherlands. And the financial situation in the Netherlands being quite strong as it is, I don't expect that to happen, because they will want to have that strong position still as well. Now also, there was less inflow of new people to the Netherlands, of course. So there was a kind of slowing down there. Essentially, we didn't really notice that in the market, because there was still a lot of buying, like Kim already mentioned, and a lot of outflow out of the city, and then again, like the tide moving back in. Also, what happens is that indeed the international travel will in time start up again, and still there's a far greater demand than there's a supply in housing. If the demand is higher than the supply, then property values will very unlikely decrease. So in that sense, it's still a healthy market. Also, property values will increase due to low interest rate. If the interest rate is lower, you can borrow more, so you can afford more. So the prices go up. So that's a wave that goes like that as well. So that's something to consider. Also, when and if the values of properties will decrease, and you bought a property, that might sound scary, but it only is if you sell your house. So only then it is a risk that you have, because if you can wait until the property values have increased again, there's no harm, of course, there, because then you'll be back at the same level and maybe a bit higher. My expectation to what it impacted in some way, because the interest rate increased somewhat, it decreased again, and the mortgage market is pretty much back to what it was. The only thing is that the banks are a bit more scared there. Does that impact something really? No. They will ask you for 1 or 2 extra forms, and that's just a formality, excuse the pun. But that's just something that some information that you have to fill out. Do you expect to lose your job in the next 6 months due to COVID? No? Sure. And they have done their due diligence. That's from the bank side. We will definitely get to the bottom of what your situation is, to make sure that we don't overcredit you or don't get you a mortgage that is actually not suitable to your situation. So that's something we have some guard position there as well. So, but nothing too impactful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, then a very important question as well, of course. We'll start with you again, Kimo. Can you tell us a little bit about our fees?
Yes, so we have 2 different services. One service is a very COVID-proof unaccompanied service. What we do there is we help out with well, no, let me rephrase that. Once you've found a property, you've seen a property that you love, you want to spin an offer on it, that's when we kick into gear. What do? We do property research. So we review the documents linked to the property. We do price research. So we check the market value of the property based on references. We help submit the offer, we negotiate, and then we get in third parties. What we do is we review all the legal documents. We'll make sure that you know what you sign up for, and we'll manage the process there onwards. That's the unaccompanied version. You'll see us like this. We'll be in touch with you a lot digitally. We'll try to make as much eye contact as possible to build up that relationship. But honestly, it's been working pretty well. I think that what we've seen is actually a spike of people going for that package. Also, maybe because it's the more affordable package from the 2, we charge €2,000 for that, and that is um, not necessarily linked to a certain amount of offers. So, of course, if we've submitted the 10th offer, then we might actually have a conversation about strategy, maybe already after the third offer. But we will make sure that we actually support you until you've actually purchased the home. That's the first package. We call that the smart package. Why do we call it the smart package? Because it's very smartly packed. It's maybe for people who feel a little bit more comfortable in the process and will only require our services once they've actually seen a property that they love. The other package is the complete package. It has everything, and we actually accompany you. What do we do? Once you found a property on Funda, we actually call the agent to arrange for the viewing. We go to the viewing with you. We do everything else that's in Smart, but we also accompany you to the notary. We accompany you to the technical inspection. So we're kind of like that second pair of eyes. We'll hold your hand throughout the process, literally, and we'll be there for you. We charge a little bit more for that because it takes a lot more time because we'll go on a lot of the viewings and everything like that. So we charge 4,800 euros. That is all including tax and everything. So those are the two services that we offer. No hidden fees, no extra commissions, no extra taxes. That is it.
Then I guess it's my turn. So we charge a fixed fee of 3,250 euros, which fortunately is tax deductible. So the taxes being the kind people as they are, they will give you back approximately 40% of that.
Always hurts a little bit when you say that after hours.
Sorry, mate. So what we do is we guide you through the whole process from getting understanding of your finances until you have these keys of your housing in hand, and then 30 years after that as well, because we will be your contact person regarding your mortgage for the next 30 years, being the duration of your mortgage. If you have any questions in the meantime, you can always contact us to check in what the situation is or any questions you might have. The whole process, why I state that, is because we value that we think that it's very important that when you look around for properties, that you know what the situation is and what you can afford. So we won't just tell you, well, this is what you can get and have fun and get back to us when you want a bid. Each and every property that you think is interesting, send us the link and we'll check all the specifications of this property. So if there's anything that will impact the mortgage, such as the ground lease or the homeowners association when you buy an apartment, all these things can impact your mortgage. Also the energy rating, even that's specific, it can have an impact. Also, we work with over 30 banks independently, luckily. So we can already at any specific time, we can see exactly what is the best fit for you. And then also, if we see a change in interest rates, we can readjust your calculations. So you always know exactly when you want to put in an offer, you know exactly what the input of savings would be, what your monthly payments would be. So you have confidence in putting in this offer, because that's essentially what we do. It's not necessarily rocket science. I don't want to downplay my job, of course, but it's not rocket science what we do. We guide you through a process that we know the way like the back of our hands. So that's what we do. Make you comfortable in placing a bid because it's exciting enough as it is and you don't need any stress there. There will be elevated blood pressure, but let's keep it at a safe and healthy way.
Perfect. So we'll ask you a few more questions, and then please, if you have any more questions, pop them in the Q&A. I think Ludo's done a great job with answering all of them. Normally we see kind of like 40, 50 questions still in there, but now Ludo has rocked the boat and make sure there's only a few left. I'll share a few more polls, or one more poll, sorry, just a few more questions, because we'd love to get your feedback on how likely you would be to refer this webinar to a friend or a colleague. Please rate us and be brutally Dutch honest or very straightforward. Did you miss anything in this webinar? If so, yes, then what would you like to get more information on? If there's any specific questions that you have, pop them in the Q&A. I almost wanted to say chat, but pop them in the Q&A, and then we'll try to answer all of them after we've completed the poll. We're seeing the first answers come in. Took a little bit of time. I think you guys were really considering, okay, what do I score these guys? We're seeing a wide range of everything that is pretty good. Cool. Three. That's a very very slow 3, 2, 1, because I'm seeing some more answers come in. 3, 2, 1, and that is it. Thank you very much. So we'll share the scores. One person scored as a 3 and one person scored as a 6. When I go home with those scores, my parents will not be very happy. And I'm always curious to find out why you scored as that. So please pop it in the chat why you scored as a 3 or a 6, because we would love to find out what we could have done to improve. And we actually love to have a chat with you guys to figure out what information you would like from us. The rest of you scored us a 7, 8, 9, 10. I think if we add the tally up and I average it, my parents will be very happy. So that's a good sign. Some of you missed something in the webinar. What did you miss? Again, if there's questions about that, pop them in the Q&A. And the majority of you did not miss anything. So that's very good for us to hear. What would you like to get more information on? The buying process, the mortgage process, third-party costs. A lot of you would like to know what a winning bid is. I'm gonna plug my my other webinar. I have a lunch and learn on Friday. We'll share a little bit more about the actual winning bid. So I'll share 5 tips on what is the win a bid. Have a look at is it on our website? I think it's on our website. Have a look on our website. You can actually sign up there, or have a look on our Facebook page. You'll also find it there. So sign up for the Friday lunch and learn. It's in the afternoon. I think it's 12:30, and I'll share everything there is to know about securing or submitting an offer that is hopefully a winning bid. Some people would like to learn a little bit more about taxes or a buy-to-let mortgage. Everyone that said that they would like more information about mortgages, either pop the question in Q&A or actually reach out to Mr. Mortgage. These guys can tell you all about it. So that is that. Thanks a lot for the feedback, though. Much appreciated. I believe feedback is a gift, so I'm happy to see this. We'll go to the Q&A. Lulu's going to mention that, but I'm going to just show this on the screen real quickly. You can schedule a free intake with us, no strings attached, via the website, or once you've received this presentation, click on the link, or just go to experthousingnetwork.nl or mrmortgage.nl. You'll actually be able to request a intake there too. Okay, Ludo, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Well, as Kimo mentioned, I'll be doing the Q&A. I'll start from the top and just go down. Please excuse my pronunciation of all the names. We have people from all over the world, so I'm going to do my best. But I have called Jose once, and I will never forget that.
He's not forgiving of that, yeah. Or she. Yeah.
Cool. Exactly. We'll start with Alessandra. Her question is for you, Kimo. The question is, what is the general strategy that we recommend with bidding?
The general strategy, if I'd have to put it in a nutshell, is make a considerate offer. And considerate means that you take the other party into account. There's several elements of submitting an offer, and a lot of people think that price is the most important thing, but I believe that security is the most important thing, that the seller will want to know that you can actually move forward. How do you do that? Not just by offering the highest amount, but by making sure that the conditions that you submit the offer with are reasonable and give the seller the ID that you know what you're talking about, so you've done your due diligence and you're actually able to secure a mortgage if you need to. So those are the things that I would actually focus on. More importantly, is that than the actual purchase price. Of course, purchase price can't be too low or can't be the lowest or anything like that, but there's more elements that play into it. For a more detailed story, join me on Friday, because I'll actually spend 30 minutes just talking about offers.
All right, cool. Thanks for that. Then for you, Robin, we were talking a little bit about how your fees are tax deductible, and some other fees are tax deductible. How does that actually work? So if you're, for example, paying 1,500 euros, do I get the whole 15 euros back, or what would be tax deductible in that sense?
Yeah, very good question. So any mortgage-related fees are tax deductible, or any financial security costs are tax deductible. What that means is, for instance, the valuation report, the service of Mr. Mortgage or your financial advisor or the bank, it's tax deductible, and the mortgage part of what the notary does, so the signing the mortgage deed, is also tax deductible. What that means is, so let's say that's about 6,000 euros. You'll get back approximately 40% of that of those costs. And how that works is, let's say you buy a house this year. So next week you go to the notary, you pay paid all these fees, and then you file your tax declaration. start of next year. You always file your tax return at the start of every new year, usually around March or April, May. That's usually when you do that. So then you can state, well, hey, I bought a home and I paid all these fees for that. And then in your tax return, you will get back that tax return.
Okay. Clear. Perfect. All right. Then we have a question from an anonymous attendee. This one's for you, Kimo. It's regarding the age of properties. Is there an advisable age that we should keep in the back of our minds when buying a property? And are there any risks attached to buying old age properties, for example?
Okay, that is a good question. I've not had that question before. That question, so if you buy a property, then of course, the newer the property, the more likely it is that the energy label, for example, will be a little bit better, that the construction is a little bit better. So you'll find less trouble down the line. But it also means that maybe the look is a little bit different, right? Or it's very old fashioned, or name it. Older properties, there are a few things worth looking into. Of course, the construction is one, but also like how soundproof is it, right? Is it well insulated, stuff like that? Energy label too, but it might have more character. And what we've seen is that properties that have a little bit more character are a little bit more stable, or are actually sold for a little bit more than properties that were built in the 1970s, 80s, where they were really just building out of practicality than building out of kind of like aesthetics. So I think it's a matter of taste. I don't want to say that an old property or a property that's 100 years old is a bad purchase. I think it depends also on how well the property is actually maintained. So have a look into the details of the property. See, for example, if you buy an apartment and it's maintained by owner association, how well are they maintaining the place? How much saving? How much do they have in savings? How much are they saving on a monthly basis? And what was the last maintenance that they did? How well are they communicating about these things? So that's all important, because I think that just looking at the property from an age perspective is not going to tell you a lot, except for maybe the different materials that were being used. But if a property is maintained pretty well, then a property, like look at, for example, the canal houses in the major cities, whether it's Amsterdam, or whether it's The Hague, or whether it's I'm not sure other canals in The Hague. I think they're Utrecht, Delft. These properties have been built 1800s, and they're still pretty good, right? So there's no saying that an older property is of worse quality and can't last for another couple of 100 years and is enjoyable. So have a look at those things. I hope that answered your question a little bit. Ludo, I share with you the link for the lunch and learn. For anybody that wants to learn a little bit more about the offer process, maybe Ludo, you can pop it into the chat. Feel free to sign up. I think that's the Zoom link actually. I'm not sure if you can actually sign up for that.
I or not by accident at all. I actually copied the link as well.
Okay, cool.
So I already sent it to someone, but I'll send it to everyone.
That's the Zoom link. So you can actually join us on 12:30. Maybe we'll send it in the email as well. But I hope to answer your question a little bit about age. So it's not necessarily houses can age pretty well.
Just like a fine wine.
Yes, and men.
Exactly. All right, then we have a question for you, Robin. A question from Brenno. Brenno moved to Utrecht on the 1st of June, so a few days ago, and he's going to start working on the 7th of June. Is there a time or a specific certain amount of months that he should wait, or he needs to wait to be able to get a mortgage?
Well, hi Brenno. First off, congrats on your new job. No, not necessarily. It kind of depends per lender, though. Not all banks have different interest rates, but also each have different conditions to their mortgage. So some need you to have the same job or have been in the Netherlands for at least 6 months, for instance. We selected all these over 30 banks so we can really see their difference in conditions as well. So there are sufficient banks that are perfectly fine, willing to give you a mortgage when your finances live up to that as well. The most important thing to consider is when you're in a probation period, then we have to wait until that's up, but there's nothing else to consider there. There are definitely possibilities to close a mortgage.
Perfect. Well, that's good to hear. So let's buy a house, Brenno.
Yeah.
This question is from Vasilina. She has a question for you, Kimo. we were talking a little bit about transfer tax and that you need to be, 35 or well, younger than 35 actually. At what point do you need to be younger than 35? Is that when you sign the purchase contract or when you actually get your keys?
It's a good question. So technically, once you've signed the purchase contract, most likely you'll get a form from the notary about what you'll be eligible for. There's a reason they call it transfer tax, and that is because it's linked to the actual transfer of the property. So you'll let me give you an example. Let's say you turn 35. The day before transfer, that is very bad luck. What you want to try and do is make sure the transfer takes place a little bit earlier, because that's what they look at. They'll ask for the information before that. So once you've signed the purchase contract, you'll get the notary document to file for, okay, hey, I'm actually eligible for the 0% or the 2%, but the transfer date is the actual date that they'll look at based on your age. By the way, I take my previous comments back about men aging well. That was not very appropriate.
Cool. All right, then we have a next question for you, Robin. A question from Alexandru. Can I have a mortgage if I already have a loan? So let's say for a short period of 2 years.
There can be possibilities. It really depends on what the amount of the loan is, what your income is. A loan will impact your mortgage capacity. So if there is a loan, it will 100% mean that you can borrow a bit less than when you wouldn't have a loan. Essentially, what will be done is when we check your mortgage capacity, we look at what your total gross amount of income is. And then if you have any loans, for instance, then that will lower your budget that you have to spend on your mortgage, so you can borrow a bit less. Doesn't mean that you can borrow nothing, or doesn't have to mean that you can borrow nothing, but it really is very specific to each and every situation. So yeah, there are possibilities. We have to see to what extent it impacts the mortgage.
Okay. All right. Then next question is for you, Kimo, from an anonymous attendee. What differentiates Expat Housing Network to an aankoopmakelaar in terms of service that we provide in the buying process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that most aankoopmakelaars are not just aankoopmakelaars. What they do is they most likely also sell properties, and then they're easily distracted because it's much easier to sell a property than it is to buy a property. The second is that it's very difficult to relate to what you're going through if you've not lived abroad, or if you can't really relate to that process of moving to a new country and so on. The other thing is, like I mentioned, they most likely will also sell properties, because most agents get into the business becoming selling agents, and then they do kind of like buying on the side. So what they'll have is they'll have a focus on both aspects, but they'll not have like a specialty. What we do is we have a specialty, so we have all processes linked to purchasing a home. What that means is that not just the process, but also the network that we've built, the trust that we've built with third parties, with other real estate agents, is relatively high. So our added value is making sure that we understand the actual process, not just the rules and regulations or the timeline, but also the nuances that come with it. We have a translation, everything ready, so we'll be able to actually support you in that process. Is there anything else that makes us stand out? Yeah, I'd say the fee, of course. We charge a fixed fee. A lot of real estate agents or aankoopmakelaars, they charge a commission. I don't think that is that's the right incentive for them to work on. Plus, we don't technically have a cap. So if it takes a little bit longer for you to buy a home, then we'll be there with you. And from experience, what I know is that some aankoopmakelaars, and not all, I don't want to generalize, but some get bored after the second offer because they feel that it's too difficult to buy a home. We don't. We want to make sure that you actually end up buying a home, end up living here, staying here, and that you're happy with our service. We always have kind of like a secret slogan. Not really secret if I share it with you, but that we say that if we don't get invited to your housewarming party, we didn't do a good job. What does that mean? Well, first of all, if you're throwing a housewarming party, you've got a new home, so congratulations. And you're happy to share that with your friends and family, or maybe you want to trash it because it's a shitty place. But either way, you bought it, so that's really good. And the second part of that is that you actually enjoyed our service, so we will actually be able to make it a pleasant process. Otherwise, you wouldn't invite us. So we did get a lot of invitation. At some point, we said, okay, hey guys. we can't intend everything is really nice, but just enjoy your home, and that's kind of like what we focus on. So I think that is something that you'll not necessarily find with other real estate agents. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
I think so. I do have a follow-up question. It's a question from Mark. Do we actually also help with smart ways to find properties to begin with? So, for example, other ways than looking on Funda every day?
Yeah. So that's also a question we get very often because it is a very competitive market at the moment. So what we do is we have a network of developers and everything. So we do reach out to them every now and then, but the majority of the properties that you'll find are on Funda. Why? Because the seller wants to see their house on Funda. Unless, for example, the property is more than 2 million euros, then some of them don't want to have it kind of like shown openly on public websites. But the majority of the properties that you'll find are on Funda. Then we get a lot of questions of people saying like, hey, but what happens to all these properties that are shared between real estate agents? Yeah, that sometimes happens, and we still find those properties on Funda. And what we find is that we're still being able to actually get those viewings. And every now and then it happens that it's actually full, but most of the times actually reserve spots for real estate agents, for aankoopmakelaars, and then we'll actually be able to get a property. If you want to get a search, or if you want us to search on Funda, then that is a kind of like bespoke service, and we have to talk about that. It's not something that we initially offer. Yeah, so I hope that answers the question a little bit.
I think so, for sure. Thank you for that. All right, question for you, Robin. A question from Bruno. He asks, having the 30% rule, does having the 30% rule affect on the amount when getting the mortgage?
It could. Well, it does to some extent. The thing is that the 30% ruling now has been limited from 8 to 5 years. So you have essentially an added income for the next 5 years from the moment that starts, of course. So we know that you have a higher income for 5 years. That means that you can borrow a bit more in a mortgage, but only for 5 years. So that means also that the amount that you can borrow more, let's say it's 6,000 euros, then you have to repay that 6,000 euros in 5 years instead of the full 30 years, which you would have with the remaining mortgage amount. So it's kind of a safety net. If you really need it, then we can definitely use it. Also, it kind of depends on the bank, but there's sufficient banks that allow that income as well. If we don't necessarily need it, I wouldn't. The reason why is because you have to repay it quite fast. That means that your monthly payments are relatively higher than with the remaining 30 years. So you can, if it's really needed. If we don't need it, I wouldn't.
Okay, all right, makes sense. Cool. Then for you, Bruno, a question from Katja. If the prices go up, that doesn't mean that the values go up as well. Is that correct?
Good question. Yeah, so in order to get the value or the market value of a property, you look at reference properties. And if the value of the reference properties increases, then the value of your property increases as well. And that's why we try to calm everyone down and make sure that they don't follow the narrative where we say, or where people say, oh, you have to overbid 10% over the asking price. You have to overbid 20% over the asking price. Because if everybody starts doing that, then the market values will continue to go up. It's kind of like a upward spiral. And of course, it also has to do with supply and demand and stuff. And of course, with level of savings, how easy it is to get capital and such. So there is a foundation there. So it's not like from 1 week to another, suddenly that foundation is taken away and then there's no actual value, because I think we've let go of connecting value to the amount of bricks that a property is built on a very, very long time ago. But yeah, to come back to your question, yes, if the value of properties that are being bought goes up, then the market value of future properties will also go up. Of course, at some point we'll see, I think it slowed down a little bit. So I think that that this is not a ongoing increase. So I don't think we'll see another 10% increase in the next 12 months. I can't tell you what the actual increase will be, but I will tell you that there will be some increase, but not as crazy as it was the last 12 months.
Okay, all right. Then I'm heading back to Robin for the question of Cecilian. Again, if I'm saying that correctly.
Sounds good.
He or she is, yeah, I think so too. He or she is interested in a buy-to-let mortgage plus different financing situations. Do you also assist for this kind of financing?
Yeah, we do. And I think the whole scope of what the question was about. So buy-to-let mortgages, we also definitely do. When you buy a buy-to-let, or when you change your current mortgage into a buy-to-let mortgage or investment mortgage, it's a kind of type of investing, and that's also something we help with as well. Not only in real estate, but also to manage your assets. So if you have money to spare and you want to have it work for you, there are different ways of investing. Real estate is one. Different types of investing. So there can be a combination of stock, of real estate, of your personal savings. So it's definitely something that we offer as a service as well, albeit our name is still Mr. Mortgage, but it goes further than only mortgages. Also your personal finance we can look into to see what the best way is we can have your money work for you. So definitely, yeah. I hope that answers the question, or we need to go more into that, but that's something we'll hear later on.
Exactly. For another time. All right. A question from Younes for you, Kimo. We were talking a little bit about overbidding already. Can you explain that process a little bit regarding overbidding? Because Younes heard that the bank doesn't pay more than the value of the property.
Cool. Let's go back to this view. So the asking price is 380, the market value is 430, but you buy the property for 460. Then the amount that the bank will give you is 430. This is, of course, if your salary allows that, right? But the bank will look at the market value of the property. This is the value that the appraiser officially gives to your property. So the difference you'll actually have to pay with your own cash. Let's say it's the same property. Oh, let's go back. It's the same property, it's offered for 380, and then you actually buy it for 430. Congratulations, because the market value is 430, and you will actually get 100% value. So you don't have to put up any extra cash towards the property, maybe for the actual closing fees, but that is the amount that you'll get from the bank. Make sure that you don't stray off from that market value too much, unless you really want to. You have the capital, but always have a look at that market value. Use that to consider where you want to overbid or not, because that's going to tell you how much in cash you have to put up towards the property, and not the asking price. So when we talk about overbidding, we talk about, okay, hey, how much are people currently overbidding over the market value because of the competitive market? We're not talking anything about the asking price. So sometimes it happens that the actual market value is achieved and you've bought the property for the market value, or sometimes even a little bit below the market value. So I think it's very important to keep this in mind. Hope that answers your question.
I think so. Would you also advise a certain amount of cash to have in your pockets when you're planning to buy a house?
At this point, the more the merrier. Why do I say that? Because you don't just want to spend all your money on the property itself. Maybe you want to actually do something to the property as well. Maybe you want to kind of like paint it. Maybe you want to buy some new furniture and stuff like that. And it depends a little bit on what your price bracket is. If, for example, your mortgage cap is 200,000, then I would advise to have a little bit more in cash, because you're competing against a lot of people, versus if you have a mortgage cap of 800,000 euros, right, or 900,000 euros. So it depends a little bit on where you are in the market. The more affordable your property, the more competition you'll face. The more expensive your property, the less competition you'll face. I can't necessarily give you a percentage. I think a comfortable percentage is between 15 and 20% to have in cash and capital. Why? Because if you take off the closing fees, which are anywhere between 3 to 5%, you'll end up with 10 to 15% in the actual capital that you could put up towards the property. So that's something that I would technically have. Why I say the more the merrier. Maybe actually you want to do something to the property, so then you could end up maybe having 25% in cash. So make sure you do have some savings, because otherwise you might get frustrated, because if you only can buy a property for the actual market value, then you'll find it more difficult to find a property like that, right? Especially in a competitive market. Maybe you have to move out of the city, or maybe you have to find something that's a fixer-upper. But it's not impossible, but still, I think it's useful to save some money, especially if you have a low budget.
Sure, I think so too. All right. Question for you, Robin. A question from Monica. She asks, if you have a tax-free salary, while working for an international organization in the UN system. How does this affect your mortgage?
Well, you can, first off, no problem to get a mortgage. Let's start there. How it affects your mortgage, the main thing is that we can still use your income. The thing to consider is because you don't pay tax, there's also no tax benefit. So that's something to consider. So the interest, usually you get a tax benefit over the interest that you pay over your mortgage, and that wouldn't be the case, and also no tax benefit on the mortgage-related fees that you pay. For the rest, no other impact really. So that's yeah, good as it is.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect, cool. Kimo, can you tell us a little bit about apartments that are being constructed? Is that a good idea to buy an apartment that is under construction or being constructed?
Yep. I'm gonna give you the pros and the cons of buying a new build or a new construction. Let's start off with the pros. The pros are you're going to get a brand new apartment. Most likely, energy label is going to be A or double A or name it, and you'll have a very energy sufficient and a very well insulated property. So no noise from the neighbors, thick glasses, thick walls, really good everything. So that is an upside. The other upside is that you might be able to actually influence the interior of the property a little bit. So you might actually be able to pick the kitchen, pick where the actual power sockets will be, the bathroom, stuff like that. Double check that though, because the drawings will actually be able to tell you a lot about what the level of construction is that's going to be finished in and what you can actually choose from. Don't stare yourself blind on the selling price, because you might have to pay a little bit more to get the right things into your property that you want. So those are the upsides. The other upside is that because of the quality of the build, that the market value will not be affected as much, and you don't have any maintenance in a short notice, right? So most likely the savings of the owner association will be enough to cover for any unforeseen costs, because there won't be that many in the beginning. The downside, however, to buying a new build is that first, you're buying something that doesn't exist yet. So until you can actually move in, you have to rent a property, right? So you have double the cost. Why? Because you'll pay rent. And then what happens is when you buy a new build, you'll pay the property in installments. So first you pay for the ground, then you pay for every level of finishing that has been done, whether it's foundations, whether it's the skeleton, and so on, so on. You'll have to take out a mortgage for that because you have to pay that. And that means you'll incur mortgage costs. Robin can tell you a lot more about what that actually means, but take that into account. The other thing is that you haven't seen the property in real life, so you don't really know what you're getting yourself into, or what the light will be like, or how it actually feel. So that is definitely something that yeah, maybe you want to be careful of. In some cities, you'll experience ground lease. That means that the ground that the property is built on is owned by the municipality, and you actually have to pay a fee on a yearly basis as kind of like rent to rent the ground. So that's something to look into. And this links a little bit to the to the first pro point, which is like a pro. Double check what the actual level of finishing will be, because project developers can really, well, they really know how to sell properties like this, and then you'll see all these kind of like these mock-ups and these digital printouts from what it could be like, and then you find out that the stairs that you saw in the photo are not really the stairs that you got, right? You actually got a ladder. So make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. So that's super important. Are there any other downsides? No, I think those are the most important ones, right? So have a look at that and double check with the guys from Mr. Mortgage what it actually means for your monthly installments. Did I miss anything, Robin?
No, well, I've been there. I did buy an apartment as a new build, and it is true. It's and the waiting. That's the thing. So it really depends on when you're getting into, but the waiting can be a thing, but it really depends on how long that is. When it comes to the monthly payments for your mortgage, they will gradually increase. So you have to consider this the double cost to some extent, but it will gradually increase as time goes by. A larger amount of your mortgage that you took out will actually be paid out. and then over that you pay your mortgage. So it will gradually increase. Definitely something to consider, that you can, for the time of the build, can bear the double cost. No.
There's one thing I missed. Oh my God, that I missed that. That is terrible. Transfer tax. You don't have to pay transfer tax when you buy a new build property. Wow, that just saved you a lot of money. Good thing I remembered. No, so that's the thing, right? So when you buy a property that's already existing, or if you buy the new build from a owner, so not from the project developer, from an owner, then you have to pay transfer tax. If you buy a property from a project developer, then you don't have to pay transfer tax. So that could actually save you 2%, which is a decent amount. That's a pro, by the way, huh?
That's a big pro.
Yeah, it's a
for
big
sure.
pro.
All right, let's see. Then I'm going to stick with you, Kimo. I have a question from PSD. Here she asks, whichever house I like on Funda is already full for a viewing. How do I get a viewing in these cases? Is there an option to view and bid in such a case?
So what you can do is you can call us and we can call them and figure out if there's a way to actually squeeze in somewhere. Sometimes we're actually able to manage that. If not, then, so I wouldn't advise submitting an offer for a property that you haven't viewed, right? I think that's, I heard the other day that in Helsinki, it's even crazier and actually people buy properties without having viewed it. Maybe that is the future. Maybe a digital viewing could work. So you can actually ask the selling agent if they do digital viewings, but still getting a feel for the property, especially if it's not a new build, is important, right? Because you might not get the good vibe of the property and have a look at the neighborhood, stuff like that. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend submitting an offer on a property you haven't seen, but hey, if you're dead set on it, then you could try that. Then figure out from the selling party when a deadline is and request all the documents and all that stuff. But please note that the selling agent will also look at your offer knowing that you have not seen the property. So again, this boils down to security, right? So if the agent has two similar offers and one person has seen the property and the other person hasn't, then most likely he'll go for the person that actually has seen the property because he'll know that they'll move forward and not just based on anything, but because they've seen the property. If they move forward with you and you actually come into the property because you do a technical inspection, you're like, no, it wasn't really what I expected, then you can pull out. So they want security, right? So please be mindful of that. Did I miss anything? Yeah, one thing worth mentioning is a lot of the real estate agents, what they do is they post a property online and then people actually can request viewings online, right? So you go into Funda and on the right-hand side, you see a little button that says call the agent. Don't do that. Below that, you'll see request viewings. Click on that one because then you'll be in their file and they'll actually call you back and arrange a viewing with you. So I would technically do that whenever you see a property on Funda, even when you get our support, right? Because when you send it to us, we might respond to you 30 minutes later, and then it might already be full. So I think it's super, super important that you do that. Are there any other ways? No. Well, maybe you can kind of like sweet talk the receptionist and find out when the actual viewings are taking place and then goes to the property. So that could be a way, but that's I'm not sure how that's going to be received. Who knows, right?
Exactly. Who knows, indeed.
Mhm.
That there's tons of ways, for sure. A question for you, Robin. An anonymous attendee has heard that there are different types of mortgages calculations, depending on the interests. Can you explain a little bit about that?
There are different mortgage types and different ways of calculating your mortgage. Not really, without going into very technical mortgage nerdiness. So really basically, interest rates are separated in different brackets. So that means that the Dutch government and joint banks have decided, well, probably if your interest is higher, then the interest is fixed for a longer term. If your interest is fixed for a longer term, you have more security. So the interest rate actually has an effect very slightly to what part of your about your budget. So you can have a slightly higher budget when your interest is just at the limit of a specific bracket. Again, it's very technical, so then it can make a slight difference, but it is something that we work with as well. Just to give you an example, it's a bit weird. You might say the logical thing is, and it is true, the higher your interest rate is, the lower your mortgage capacity. So the lower your mortgage interest rate is, the more you can borrow, and that's true. Just when you're just at that limit, then it can vary a bit. When your interest rate is 1.51, then you can borrow significantly more than when your interest rate is 1.45, for instance. So that's, I think that might be the thing that is mentioned here, and that's something that we do as well. That's where we go crazy as well, and we can tweak everything about the mortgage to see, well, what is the best fit for your specific situation. Now, my personal preference as a financial advisor is that you don't max out on your mortgage. It gives you more flexibility if you go below your absolute maximum, so then we wouldn't have to need that, and we just go with the best interest rate and the lowest interest rate out there. So that's my preference. I think that is what is regarded. Any other mortgage calculations based on the interest rate, there are not really any. There are different mortgage types, but they don't really affect your mortgage possibilities.
Okay, all right. Thanks for that explanation. Back to EHN, Kimo. Would EHN also be able to help if there are any renovations needed to the property?
So we don't help with the actual renovations. What we can help with is two things. One is we have a network of contractors that can support you. The other one is there are certain things in the process that you might want to take into account. I think the guys from Mr. Mortgage will be able to tell you that there's something called a building depot. You can borrow some extra money from the bank if you want to do renovations. What we will do is we will make sure that the appraiser, because they'll need to actually assess what the value is currently and what the value will be once you've actually renovated the place, that is briefed properly and that you understand what you can do and how you actually file for that stuff. And then once that's done, you take it to Mr. Mortgage and they'll file with the bank, and the bank will say, okay, hey, you'll get a percentage of the I think it's the added value of the cost in your building depot, which is added on top of your mortgage. So we can actually support you with the process, with linking you to contractors. And of course, if you have any questions on what you can do or cannot do within a property, of course, to a certain extent, we'll not be able to look behind walls or figure out where the piping is, but we'll be able to tell you what you can do to some extent, whether it's taking down carrying walls or moving the kitchen from one end to the other. I think there's several things that we can tell you. So just run it by us and brainstorm together with us if you have any questions there. That's part of the job that we actually like a lot as well, is trying to figure out, okay, hey, if we look at the floor plan of this place, what can you do to it, right? Sometimes people sell a one-bedroom property, but you can easily make it into a very nice two-bedroom property. And it already adds a little bit of value to your property, right? Because more people will be interested in buying a two-bedder than buying a one-bedder, especially, for example, families or couples that want to have parents coming over. So that's a really nice part of the job.
For sure, definitely. I have a question from Mark, also for you, Kimo. He asks, can you touch upon the process of looking for a new place to buy while trying to sell your current one?
Ooh, so if you're selling your current home, that doesn't technically have to be an order of things. I think from a mortgage perspective, maybe Robin can share a little bit more about maybe bridging mortgages, stuff like that. But what would I advise? Would I advise to buy a home first or to sell it first? Well, currently the selling market it's relatively easy to sell your property, right? And the time that it takes to kind of like finish a construction depends on the different projects that are out there. So let's say you find a place that is done end of this year, that would be great. But if you find a place that is done maybe in a year and a half or 2 years, then maybe you want to hold on to your current property a little bit longer. So I would maybe first consider buying a home, and then you can consider selling your home. So that is something that I would advise. But then again, what does that mean? Let's say, Robin, they buy a home with a mortgage, and the home will be finished at the end of 2022. What does that mean for their possibilities? And will they be able to actually take out a mortgage while still having a mortgage on their current property?
Yes. It also kind of depends on what you mean by, Mark, what you mean by new property. If it's newly built, then sure, we have to consider the building time. If it's another your new property, so it's an existing build, that's different a bit as well. But in any case, if you buy a new house and then sell, it kind of makes sense because it's quite relatively easy to sell your house, as Kim already mentioned. And then there can be Okay, there you go, Mark. Thank you. It's a new, not newly built. So then what happens is that you buy a new home and you apply for a mortgage. Then that will be based on your new property, but you also have a current mortgage on your old apartment or old property. So what happens then, let's say the property that you currently own is worth 350,000 euros, for instance, and your outstanding mortgage is 300,000 euros. So you have this 50,000 euros as a gain, a property gain or a profit that you're expected to get, but you don't have it yet, but you do want to use that for your new property already. What will be regarded is your current mortgage will be not regarded because it's expected you to sell that property. Then you can have a pre-financing of that 50,000 euros expected profit of the property. So you can use that in a bridging loan on your new mortgage. So we'll take a look at the new property, at your current income to cover the new mortgage. And then that 50,000 euros expected profit is something that can be covered in a so-called bridge loan. And this bridge loan is pre-financing of the expected profit, and that usually has a duration of about 2 years. And then when you actually sell your current home, then automatically that bridging loan will be repaid, will be paid off by the profit that you make. So you can already have a loan or a pre-financing over the expected profit that you make on your current home. So yeah, there are definitely possibilities there. I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Then I have a question again for you, Kimo. From the perspective of the seller, is it usual that they put the asking price roughly at the same at which the market value is? Is it even possible that the asking price is even higher than the market value?
So the first answer is no. Most often, and honestly, let me rephrase that. It depends a little bit on where you buy a property. So what we see in the bigger cities is that the agents are putting the properties up for lower than the actual market value, and it depends a little bit on what the agent's perspective is on how low. In some of these smaller cities, we're seeing the property or the asking price is close to the actual market value. Sometimes, if an agent is very opportunistic, he'll actually put an asking price that's higher than the market value. But be aware, because it's not very smart of the agent. Why? Because the bank will only give you 100% mortgage, and in the current sentiment of the market, some people think that they have to overbid by a certain percentage based on the asking price. Don't think that. Look at the market value. But if they do think that and they do act on that, then they might submit an offer that means they can't actually buy the property because it's too much. The bank will give them less than they actually expected because they think that the market value is actually higher than the asking price. That is a very tricky and dangerous thing for the selling agents to do, but it has happened. Like, we've seen it before, and some people get away with it, especially if you submit an offer without financing and you don't have support from from the guys from Mr. Mortgage or us. Then those are like the pitfalls that you can fall into. So your question, the first answer is no. We're seeing a lot of, especially the bigger cities, agents putting prices below the market value, a range between 5, 10, 15%, sometimes even more. And then the second question is, yes, every now and then it happens that the price that they're asking is higher than the market value, but it doesn't happen very often.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that. Then I'm going to stick with you, Kimo, but maybe there is something that Robin can add to it as well. It's regarding ground lease. And the question from the anonymous attendee is, lease land or property, are these costs to increase the lease period? And how much would these normally be?
So I think maybe for all attendees, maybe we can share a little bit more about ground lease in general. Maybe Robin can share a little bit more about what it means for your mortgage. Maybe you'd like to start off with that.
Sure. Well, first off, what ground lease is essentially that when you buy a property, it doesn't matter if it's a house on the ground or you buy an apartment, the ground that the property is situated on can still be property of the municipality. When you own an apartment, then part of that small piece of ground will still be yours to be used, essentially. So when it's owned by the municipality, they will charge you an annual fee for that. So you have to pay, every year you have to pay a certain amount. There are a couple of options there. There can be that you have to pay this annual fee. That will impact your mortgage, kind of similarly as to a loan that you would have. So we'll take a look at your budget. Of that budget will be taken off this ground lease, and then we can see what your remaining mortgage options are. To what extent that will impact your mortgage, that really depends, because every property has a different ground lease situation there. It also depends for how long that period is fixed. So it can be fixed for the next 50 years, for instance. So then till then, you know what your ground lease is. Another option is that it's been bought off already. Then somebody went to the previous owner went to the municipality and said, well, okay, I want to buy it off for the foreseeable time, usually for the next 50 years. Or even indefinitely. Now, that's something that is very fortunate for you, of course, because then you don't have to pay that fee, and then that wouldn't impact your mortgage. But let's say if it does, then we'll take a look at what the actual fee is for that annual ground lease payment, and then we'll see to what extent that impacts your mortgage. So definitely very good to keep in mind. If you check the Funda listing, do check what the cadastral data, because that's what it's listed on. What that says, if it states an annual fee, that will impact your mortgage capacity.
Perfect. That was very well explained. The only thing I'd like to add to that is that Robin talked a little bit about municipal owned ground. Sometimes you'll find privately owned ground, and I would steer clear from that as much as possible, because the general terms and conditions are very important when it comes to that, but a lot of the times they're not as favorable and not as protective of you as a property owner on top of that ground as the municipal owned ground lease is, which means that at some point the owner of that ground could raise the ground lease by a pretty good amount, so that would actually endanger, for example, your mortgage payments. And therefore, banks are not super fond of that. But definitely have a look at this also when you buy or when you actually search for properties. What is the ground lease? Share these links with us, or share them also with Mr. Mortgage. They'll be able to tell you what the impact could be on your mortgage, and we'll be able to tell you if it's actually a good buy or not, and what the actual direct or long-term implications will be for you.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you. All right, then we have our last and 73rd question of tonight. It's a question I'm going to ask to Robin. It's also from an anonymous attendee. Is it actually possible to get money from your international family to buy a house?
Yes, it is possible. So, well, that's the eye. So no, it's definitely possible. When you look up how that works within the Netherlands, then you can find that when you receive money from, and not necessarily family, it's just from someone. And when you're under the age of 40, you can receive a gift up to 100,000 euros. When you use that for the purpose of purchasing your home, you don't have to pay any gift tax or grant tax. Now that's different when it comes from abroad, because essentially what the tax authorities will think is, okay, if there's a transfer of money within the Netherlands, then they want to tax that because they want to have something, they want to chip into that transfer. When it comes from abroad, they're just more than happy that more money comes into the Netherlands, so they won't tax that. So that's good to keep in mind. Yes, it is possible. Do keep in mind that banks want to know where money comes from. So it has to be traceable where it comes from. So usually how that can be solved is through a grant agreement that will be signed by your family, for instance. So it is possible. Let us know, or let your financial advisor know, because they will know how to deal with that, because it's important that there's a paper trail of where those funds came.
Cool. All right. Thanks very much for that. That was our last question of the evening.
All right.
Perfect. Well done, Robin. Thanks a lot for sharing all your insights on things mortgages, finance. Ludo, you are a rock star as ever. I think we have a new record. I think the last webinars took, what, 2.5, sometimes 3, something. I think we had a webinar of 4 hours almost. So I'm super happy with it. We hope that we actually, hey, is there a new question coming in?
So thank you. So keep
okay, cool. We hope this actually added value to you guys. We'll share this presentation with you. Don't hesitate to schedule a free intake. I think Ludo shared the Zoom link with you as well for this Friday's 30-minute seminar on or webinar on winning bids. So what it is to actually win in this current housing market. I'll share more links or more information about that. It's beautiful day, lovely weather. It was supposed to rain today. It didn't. That's really good news. Maybe in some parts of the Netherlands it did. I'm not sure where you are, but try enjoy the last day of light and have a lovely week. It was great to have you guys. Thanks a lot for sticking around so long. We still see a decent number of people in the group here. Have a lovely night. Thanks a lot, Ludo. Thanks a lot, Robin. Take care, and we will be in touch.
Thanks, Timo.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Have a good one.